Damon Price was 37 years old. On the Friday evening, his supervisor called him into a glass-walled conference room and informed him the company was eliminating his position as part of a structural reorganization. He thanked the man for the conversation, collected his badge and his laptop, and drove home in the same measured silence he brought to everything. He arrived at the house in East Nashville at 6:42 in the evening. Nicole was already packed, not the way a person packs when they are upset, a single bag, something reactionary. She had packed the way a person packs when they have been waiting for a specific moment to arrive, and it finally has. 4 bags. The good luggage, the framed photographs already taken off the dresser. She told him she had been patient long enough. She told him she deserved more than a man who would always be one bad quarter away from nothing. She told him she was sorry and that she hoped he figured it out. Then she picked up her keys and walked through the door he held open for her, and he watched her taillights move down the street until they were gone. He stood there a long time in the quiet of the house. Then he walked through the side door off the kitchen, out to the garage, and turned on the work light above the steel table at the back. The prototype was exactly where he had left it that morning, covered in a canvas tarp, flanked by 4 years of engineering notes and 3 spiral-bound notebooks. She had walked past that garage door 1,100 times. She had never once asked what was inside. What she did not know was that 2 days earlier, a licensing firm in Cincinnati had submitted a formal written offer for the intellectual property Damon had built in that garage. The offer was $4,200,000. What happened next would redefine every assumption she had ever made about the man she had left. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The garage had started as a place to think. That was how Damon had always described it, on the rare occasions anyone asked. A place to think. It had a steel work table he had built himself from salvaged angle iron, a pegboard wall holding tools in the precise order he used them, and a single pendant light he had rewired so it hung lower and brighter than the original fixture. He had insulated the walls himself one winter weekend and installed a small wall heater that kept the temperature workable through the cold months. The floor was painted concrete. He had been a mechanical engineer for 11 years, the last 4 as a senior product development specialist at an automotive components firm in Brentwood. He understood systems. He understood tolerances. He understood the way a well-designed thing held together under pressure and the way a poorly designed thing failed. Not all at once, but gradually, at the point where the margin had always been thinnest. His mother, Ida Price, had taught him that in a different language. She had been a seamstress for 30 years in Memphis, altering and constructing garments with a precision that required her to hold measurements in her head, the way some people held songs. She had told him once, when he was 10 years old and had built a birdhouse that collapsed the same afternoon, "You got to account for the weight before it arrives, baby. Don't build for what it is. Build for what it's going to carry." He had written it in the front of the first engineering notebook he ever owned. He had met Nicole at a neighborhood association meeting 4 years into their life in Nashville. She had come with a friend, stayed for the whole meeting, and asked 3 of the best questions in the room. He had walked to the parking lot at the same time, and they had talked in the November cold for 40 minutes without either of them acknowledging the temperature. She was a marketing director for a regional hospitality brand, organized, direct, and quick to laugh at things that were actually funny. He had called her the following week. They had married 18 months later. The marriage had been good for a while. Then it had become comfortable. Then it had become something else, a performance of normalcy that required effort from both sides and produced diminishing warmth. He had noticed the shift the year before without naming it. The distance over dinner. The night she came home later than her calendar showed. A new energy in her that felt directed somewhere he could not see. He had not raised it. He was not a man who raised things before he understood them fully. What he had raised carefully and methodically over 4 years was the work in the garage. The project had started as a solution to a problem he had identified in his day job, a structural fastening component used in modular construction assemblies that had a fundamental design flaw causing costly field failures. He had spent evenings and weekends designing, testing, redesigning, and refining a replacement system. He had filed his first patent application 26 months ago, 4 months before the wedding. He had filed 3 more since. The core intellectual property was established in that first filing. in his name alone, developed on his own time, on his own equipment, in his own space. 2 days before the layoff, the licensing intermediary he had been corresponding with for 6 months had submitted a formal written offer to license the patent portfolio to a manufacturing group in Cincinnati. He had read the email in his truck in the company parking lot, sitting very still for a few minutes, then driven home without telling anyone. He had planned to tell Nicole that weekend. He had not gotten the chance. The morning after she left, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a text from a number he didn't recognize, a name he did. It said, "She's out. Call when you can." He read it twice. He set the phone down on the counter with the same deliberate care he applied to everything, and he stood in the kitchen of the house she had packed out of the night before, and he began to think through the architecture of what he was looking at. His hands did not shake. He went to the laptop on the kitchen table and opened the joint bank account they had maintained since the second year of their marriage. The balance showed $1,840. The previous month's opening balance had been $14,300. He clicked into the transaction history and found what he was looking for inside 3 minutes. 6 transfers over 11 weeks, incremental and spaced far enough apart to avoid drawing automatic flags. The amounts were $1,200, $1,500, $2,000, $1,800, $2,400, and $2,100. All had gone to the same external account. He did not recognize the account number. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He opened the shared email account they used for household correspondence. He searched the name attached to the text message. He found a thread from 9 weeks ago. Brief. 2 exchanges innocuous in language, but the timestamps placed both messages on evenings Nicole had told him she was working late. The email address connected to a public social media profile belonging to a man named Terrence Alston, 39 years old, a commercial insurance broker based in Nashville. Lean forward profile photo, a feed full of restaurant dinners and weekend trips, and one photograph from a dinner in March. Taken at a restaurant Damon recognized immediately. He had taken Nicole there for her birthday 18 months prior. In the background, partially obscured by another couple, was a woman in a dark blazer with her hair pinned up the way Nicole wore it when she wanted to look effortful but unhurried. He screenshot the photograph. He saved the email thread as a PDF. He forwarded the bank statements to his personal engineering email. He wrote 3 dates and 3 transfer amounts in the small notebook he kept on the kitchen counter. His face remained perfectly calm. He went to the file drawer in the home office and removed the hanging folder he used for household documents, insurance, car titles, tax returns. Tucked at the very back, behind a folder labeled Miscellaneous, was a document he had not placed there. He unfolded it. It was a consultation worksheet from a family law firm dated 14 weeks prior. At the top, in Nicole's handwriting, questions to ask. Below it, a list. Whether income from a job lost during marriage was still countable, whether a business developed during marriage was a marital asset, whether the house, which was in both their names, would be subject to forced sale. She had been planning it for at least 14 weeks. He refolded the document. He placed it back precisely where he had found it. He sat down at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the garage door. The work light was off. The tarp was still over the prototype. 4 years of evenings and weekend mornings under a canvas tarp in a garage she had walked past 1,100 times without curiosity. She had written on that worksheet, whether a business developed during the marriage was a marital asset. He thought about the filing date on his first patent. Then he picked up his phone and called Phyllis. Phyllis Okafor had practiced intellectual property and family law in Nashville for 18 years, a combination that seemed unusual until you considered how often the two intersected when marriages ended and one partner had built something the other had not noticed. She was 53, direct in the way of someone who had stopped performing patients long ago, and she had known Damon for 2 years through a mutual contact at a local engineering mentorship network. She met him at her office on Charlotte Avenue the following Monday. He had brought 2 folders. She had pulled his existing file before he arrived. She read through everything he placed on the table without comment. When she finished, she looked up. "Tell me about the patents," she said. "The first filing was 26 months ago," he said. 4 months before the wedding. The core claims were established entirely in that filing. The 3 filings since built on that foundation without altering the fundamental intellectual property. And the licensing offer, submitted in writing 2 days before the termination, attached to a formal term sheet. Phyllis nodded slowly. She turned to her notepad and wrote 3 lines. Then she said, "The core patent predates the marriage. The derivative filings extend the original protected claims. Under Tennessee law, the foundational intellectual property is your separate property." She paused. She may attempt to argue the business value was enhanced by marital resources. Your time, shared income, use of the residence. She would be arguing that the garage insulation and the wall heater were a marital contribution, Damon said. Phyllis looked at him for a moment. Then she said, not unkindly, "Yes, that is precisely what she'll be arguing." He drove from Phyllis's office to his mother's apartment in Bordeaux that afternoon. Ida Price was 66, still sharp, still precise, living in the same 2-bedroom apartment she had kept for 20 years, with her sewing machine by the window and a framed photograph of Damon on the day he graduated from Tennessee State on the wall above the television. She met him at the door without asking what was wrong. She already knew the shape of it from his voice on the phone. They sat at the kitchen table with instant coffee. He told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at her cup. "Your father used to say," she began, "that some people only look at a man's foundation when they're deciding whether to burn the house down." She looked at him steadily. He had been gone since Damon was 11, but the things he said before he left were sometimes the truest things. She placed one hand on the table between them. "What you built in that garage," she said, "you built before she was in the house. She knows that. Her lawyer will come to know that." He drove back that evening and went directly to the garage. He pulled the tarp off the prototype for the first time in 3 days and looked at it under the work light. It was a modular fastening assembly, elegant in the way well-engineered things were elegant. No excess, no decoration. Every element present for a specific load-bearing reason. He had tested it to 3 times the stress tolerance of the existing market standard. He had documentation for every test. He opened his laptop on the steel work table and replied to the licensing intermediary's email, which had been waiting 4 days for his response. He apologized for the delay. He confirmed his intent to proceed. He requested that the finalization meeting be scheduled at Phyllis's office in Nashville. Then he verified one remaining detail. Nicole's attorney had filed a preliminary claim that morning, forwarded to him by Phyllis, asserting that intellectual property and associated business value developed during the marriage constituted a marital asset subject to equitable distribution. The claim cited Damon's use of marital time in the shared residence to develop the business. He opened the 4 patent filings in sequence. He reviewed the filing dates, the claim language, the classification of the core innovation against the derivative expansions. He pulled the receipts he had kept in a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of the steel table. Every tool purchase, every material order, every equipment invoice going back 4.5 years. Most predated the marriage. All were paid from his personal account, separate from the joint account. He placed the receipts in a new folder. He printed the patent timeline and added it beside them. He labeled the folder with a single word and left it on the table. By Friday morning, the record was complete and clean. Some days the work was building the thing. Some days the work was making sure the documentation was sound. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The meeting at Phyllis's office was scheduled for a Thursday at 10 in the morning. The licensing intermediary had flown in from Cincinnati. A representative from the acquiring manufacturing group, attended by video on the screen at the end of the table. Phyllis had arranged the conference room to seat 6. Nicole arrived with her attorney at 10:08. She had dressed carefully, the charcoal blazer she wore to presentations she intended to control, hair pinned back with the precision she brought to important appearances. She assessed the room the way she always assessed a room, quickly, cataloging who was present, adjusting herself to meet it. Her eyes moved across the intermediary she didn't recognize, the video screen, the gray folders stacked near Phyllis's notepad, and then settled on Damon. She had not seen him in 3 weeks. Her attorney opened with a recitation of his client's position, duration of the marriage, use of the marital residence, contribution of marital time and shared resources to the development of the business in question. He had prepared a summary document, and he slid copies across the table. Phyllis waited for him to finish. Then she opened the first folder. "This," she said, "is the original patent filing." She placed a copy in front of Nicole's attorney. dated 26 months ago, 4 months before the marriage. The core innovation, the primary claims that constitute the foundational value of this intellectual property, are established entirely in this document. The invention was conceived, prototype tested, and filed before your client and my client were legally married. She opened the second folder. These are purchase receipts for every piece of equipment and material used in the development of this invention. She placed the stack on the table. Every item was purchased from Damon's personal account, predating the joint account by between 6 months and 2 years. Not $1 of marital funds touched the development of this technology. She opened the third folder. This is the engineering log. 4 notebooks. She placed them flat in a row. The first entry is dated 4 years and 3 months ago. The marriage is 2 years and 4 months old. She slid one final document across the table. This is the term sheet for the licensing agreement being finalized in this room today. The number was on the front page. Nicole's attorney picked it up. He read it. His posture changed in a way that was visible to everyone in the room. Nicole reached over and took the document herself. Damon watched her read it. He watched her eyes stop on the valuation line. He watched her read it again. He watched the understanding move across her face, not all at once, but in stages. The way a structural failure propagates from the point of origin outward, each connected element yielding in sequence until the full shape of the collapse becomes clear. $4,200,000, Phyllis said. That is the value of what was built in that garage, before the marriage, on his own time, with his own name. The room was quiet. Nicole's attorney said, carefully, that he would need time to review the documentation and reconsider his client's position. Phyllis said, take the time you need. The patent record is public. The purchase history is documented. The filing date is not a matter of interpretation. Nicole was looking at Damon. The composure she had brought into the room had given way to something unguarded, a recognition she could not organize quickly enough to conceal. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Then she said his name. He looked at her, without anger and without satisfaction. He looked at her the way he looked at a load calculation, with the steadiness of someone who had done the work and knew what the number said. I didn't know, she said. He let the silence sit for a moment. I know you didn't, he said. You walked past that door 1,100 times. He kept his voice even. You never asked what was on the other side of it. He did not say it with cruelty. He said it because it was a fact and because facts were what structures were built from. He nodded to Phyllis. He nodded to the intermediary. He picked up his pen and signed where Phyllis indicated, each signature placed with care, and the room shifted its attention to the paperwork, and the paperwork was clean, and every line had been drawn correctly. He capped his pen, he stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out of the conference room and down the hallway and through the glass doors into the afternoon, and he drove back to East Nashville and pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the side door that led to the garage. Then he went inside and turned on the work light. 11 months had passed, like the slow improvement of a well-cured finish. The garage was different now. He had expanded it into the adjoining structure, a former storage room he had converted into a proper design studio. Drafting table, pinboard walls, a new steel work table twice the size of the original. The prototype that had sat under the tarp for 4 years was now in production at a manufacturing facility in Cincinnati, moving through quality control on its way to commercial release. His name was in the patent. His name was on the licensing agreement. His name was above the door of the small engineering consultancy he had registered in February, operating out of East Nashville with 2 junior engineers he had hired from Tennessee State. Her name was Camille. She was a structural materials researcher at Vanderbilt, and they had met at a conference on modular construction systems in the spring. She had been presenting. He had been in the front row taking notes, and after her talk, she had walked directly to him and asked what he had written down. He had shown her the notebook. She had read it without performing interest. They had talked for 2 hours in a hotel conference room that emptied around them without either of them noticing. He was not in a rush. She appeared not to be either. His mother, Ida, had come to Nashville for a long weekend in April. He had taken her to the studio and shown her the expanded workspace, the production documentation, the framed copy of the first patent on the wall above the drafting table. She had stood in front of it for a long time with her hands clasped. She said, "Your great-grandmother made her first full coat with a singer she paid for herself, $1 at a time over 11 months. She kept the receipt in her Bible. She looked at him. That's what this is. He heard about Nicole through a mutual contact in the summer. She had left Nashville, taken a remote role with a hospitality group based in Dallas. The house had been sold. His share came back to him cleanly, the title settlement handled without drama. Her attorney had withdrawn the marital asset claim within 2 weeks of the Thursday meeting. Her social media had gone quiet sometime in the fall. Terrence Alston had, by the same account, moved on to other circumstances. No further details were offered. None were requested. Damon heard all of this while sitting on the back steps of the house eating lunch on a Wednesday. He took it in. He set it down. He went back to work. He was in the studio on a Saturday morning when the early light came through the east window and fell across the steel table. He was reviewing tolerances on a second-generation component, pencil moving across paper in slow, deliberate strokes, each measurement written with the same care his mother had brought to her seams, accounting for the weight before it arrived, building not for what the thing was, but for what it was going to carry. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.